I wonder what I sound like on video.
Well, we'll both find out here pretty quickly.
I mean, I already know, but I always sound, to myself, I sound a lot, sounds like my voice is a lot lower on video.
I'm always bored by my own voice.
Really?
Yeah. Like when I hear myself talking,
You're
I'm like,
"Ugh."
oh, this is,
Just stop.
I can't help, I do empathize when I make students like show their projects and stuff in class.
Yeah.
Because like today I had a couple students who were showing and they're like, can I please go to the bathroom? Like, can I get out of here so that I don't have to listen to myself? I can't take this. And sometimes I'm more, I'm more okay with that than with others, but
Like, no,
sometimes
you
I
will,
like
sit,
torture.
you will sit and look.
Yeah, you will watch yourself.
You will listen.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, what's the topic du jour? What did you want to talk about today?
I think a topic I thought would be cool to talk about was is it possible for us to prevent our own our age to cause us to be stubborn in our ways, and like that could either be thinking or like just our habits that we formed over the years, and like is it possible to stay like plastic, if that makes sense, like to be able to
More
still
pliable, you mean? Or
sure, like, but still, because like as you grow older, like who you are is more of a concrete thing. So is it do you think it's possible to stay open, and if so, how?
So, personally, I don't necessarily know that staying loose is the best thing to do. Like staying like completely, I don't think becoming super rigid is necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. It depends on what it is that you're being rigid with. And so being open would also not necessarily be good or bad. It depends. So like in what ways would, because it sounds like you're wanting to make sure that you don't become too rigid as you age. Is that?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there something specific that you're thinking of that you're wanting to keep more malleable? So that we can talk about that.
I guess my perspective on life. I want to be able to understand. So I guess part of it is like the best way to do something. So like as you get older, you realize that touching the pan while it's still in the flames isn't a good idea.
Sure.
You realize that like flipping the pancake as hard as you can is also not a good idea. Like things like that. There is better ways to do things than something else. But like I guess sometimes when I've encountered an older person, it seems like they just want to show you the best way and say that's the best way. But I don't think that is how we figure out. That's not how you progress. So like I feel like some people hit a wall, and then after that it's kind of like their way or the highway.
Or it's too like if you have the choice, because I know a lot of people, even some people my age, but in particular older generations, where you might have an updated version that you want to share with them, but they're not interested in that. Take an older person who doesn't want to ever learn email. I don't know that they exist anymore, but they prefer handwritten notes, and for them, that's the best way of communicating if it's not in person. I think in order to stay like the people who are open to that, the people who are open to trying new things, are the same people who were open to trying new things when they were younger. The people who become rigid and non-malleable are the same people who were rigid and early on. I think that probably boils down to personality type. So if your approach to life is more, I want to learn, I want to understand, I want to grow, then you don't have to worry about, am I going to have to make sure that I'm continuing to grow, so long as the goal is when something new comes along or updated comes along, you at least take it in to try and understand it.
I mean, I can see that, and I agree. Some people are more likely to, like the people who are rigid when they're young are probably going to be more rigid when they're old. But I still think that there is some sort of change as you get older. It can't stay the same.
Yeah, but I think that's for good reason. So like, there are a lot of things that, in my teens and 20s, I had a strong opinion, but it wasn't a like firm opinion. I had spent an appropriate amount of time for a 20-year-old to think about such things, but I hadn't lived long enough to really test out the thought in the real world. So you grow older, and by necessity you test out your ideas on the world, and some of those ideas are horrible ideas, and so life slaps you upside the head and says, okay, try another route, and so you end up in your 30s and 40s with an established way of operating in the world that's based off of your hypotheses when you're a teenager, whether you knew that or not, and then you're practicing those out and testing them in the world in your 20s, in real life situations, and then you refine those ideas. So you become more rigid. You're right, but it's out of it, that you want to become more rigid, like you want, because I think it has to do with, if everything stays malleable and plastic, if everything is open for update, that's too many things that are open for update. And so there are a certain amount of things that have to stay loose in your hand. Let's say, like it can get shoved off or pushed off or replaced or updated. And then there are other things that as you grow older, the grip on those things becomes tighter and tighter and tighter as you understand, okay, like, and maybe it's something that's from this hand that goes into this hand, where maybe it's your faith, maybe it's your relationship with your family or your relationship with a significant other, your trust in an institution, your idea of who you are does become more rigid over time. That's informed by the people who you're around, and by how you perceive the world, how you prefer to operate in the world. So like, I think those things do become more rigid for good reason. So like, some things move from it should stay fluid into I'm going to form an opinion and just stick with that, maybe arbitrarily, but I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing.
I think I would say it's limiting to hold something as like truth, like, and it not being able to change.
It's also freeing.
It is. I guess, but so I guess the question there is to ask would be, how would you know that you're not the person who's being completely stubborn about all your little ways that don't really matter. Like it doesn't matter how I'm holding a pen if I can write. Like small things, right? That really
Yeah.
like you can improve them, but you're just not willing to.
So that comes down to like a personal philosophy of life. So like if you're, let's say that you want to become a professional athlete, pick a sport. What's a sport that you know, if you could go pro in it, what's a sport that you would go pro in?
Golf.
Okay, golf. Me
Why
too.
not? I mean,
Um,
basketball's too hard. So
yeah.
golf.
I would love to go pro. That was like a dream for about 3 weeks when I was 21, and then I realized, oh wait, I'm not even close. But if let's say that you have that potential, and you start really honing in on becoming the best golfer, and some friends invite you over to go play basketball, pick up basketball 3-on-3 or something like that on the weekend, and your jump shot, even though you're a tall guy, your jump shot, your lay-in are really suffering. And so you have the choice the next day, do I go out and I practice golf or do I go out and practice my layup? And you only have one choice. You're limited by the fact that you have only a set amount of time in the day. And so you have to choose what is the limiting principle for how I'm going to invest my time, my energy, my output. And if you're actually able to attain possibly going professional, most people would say going out on the range or practicing that round, even though it's limiting getting better over here, you've prioritized, you've created a hierarchy of what is the best use of your time and energy.
Yeah.
You become more rigid.
Yeah. I mean, sure, I think some things need to be decided. Like there are some things that need to be decided. Like what are your priorities? Like if you have no priorities, then you end up failing at everything. Because you're trying to do everything at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree. I mean, it's still the question really is still there. How do you? Because I feel like what you're saying makes sense, but there's also another side to it, and that would be like it's almost like a pyramid, right? The base needs to be strong, and
Mm-hmm.
so let's say most of your base is strong, like most of the fundamental things that you believe are strong, but then you realize, oh no, something up here doesn't really make sense. So then you work your way back down, you find what's the problem, and then you're like, oh, I need to figure this out.
Sure.
And so then you're able to replace that with something that is more beneficial for you, and that explains the world better.
Yeah.
So,
And sometimes what happens, so kind of digging into what you're talking about, sometimes what happens, and this causes real crises for people. Like you get down to you see there's a problem. This is why people don't want to do this. You see there's a problem up here that's rooted in a problem, maybe at the base level of understanding. And so you decide, oh my goodness, this whole thing needs to be replaced or updated. And maybe that means, for some people, I know that this has happened because I'm friends with people who have experienced this or done this. Maybe that's a religious worldview or a political worldview that you find is corrupted. And so you end up going in and replacing everything in there, which included your family and your friends. And they're gone. Like they've completely abandoned so like doing that, like being so plastic that or fluid with what you believe has an inherent danger too, which is it is part of a philosophical way of looking at the world that bleeds into politics and religion as well. But going through that process of updating is good. Like but it's also, if you do it too much, you end up with problems, like if you're constantly being like, oh well, this makes sense, I might as well try this on, and you keep doing that on sub levels that are crucial to how you operate in the world. You won't know who you are, and try operating in the world not knowing who you are. Try being a dad or a mom not having an identity that's rooted in something that's real, or that's rooted in something that's malleable. Your kids won't know what to do with you. Your wife won't know what to do with you. So you want to make sure that your base level isn't, like, you want in your teens and 20s to establish a really good base level. So that is fluid. It is up for, you don't, by the time you're 23, 24, 25, you probably don't have kids that are that mature. But by the time you're 35, 36, you might have some kids who are looking at you trying to understand the world. And if you're all over the place updating everything all the time, how are they going to know what direction to go in? And you could make the argument, many people do, that's okay, that you shouldn't try and guide your children. I think we both agree with a more biblical worldview that says otherwise.
Yeah. I guess, yeah, of course, there needs to be some sort of stability once you grow older, because if you get children, if you get married, you can't just be a different person every day. I think...
Is there an example of something that you're thinking you want?
So, I think religion is like a pretty good example. Like,
okay.
So there's many religions, and I think some people are just like, no, this is it, and they don't even like test the waters anywhere else. They're like, no,
sure.
this is the one. And I guess I feel like it would be more beneficial for people to like go see what are the other religions claiming, and then choose the one that explains the most and is the most, like, it actually explains reality. It doesn't just say something random and
it coheres with reality.
It coheres with reality. And so, and I guess, and part of that, it does prove it does kind of prove the point that you do get, and maybe you have to, but you do get more rigid as you get older. And so, yeah, maybe it's one of the things you have to do when you're younger. Like, what do you do with someone that's 35 and has a base that is made of complete lies? And someone who hasn't been exposed to much, like, let's say this person grew up in like a small town, like a very small town, like it was one culture, one people group, everything. And then one day, let's say he goes off to university, by then he's already, he knows who he is. And now he meets everyone else. And I mean, you have to, and all these assumptions he's making about the world, they don't really pay off. They're all proven wrong, or a lot of them. So then there has to be some sort of change. Otherwise, you're just going to be in constant conflict with the reality.
And in the crisis that you're talking about, because that is a crisis scenario, plays out all the time. The reason why it's a crisis is, let's say that you grow up in that kind of situation and you go off to university, and you figure out, based off of your experience with other people, the classes that you're taking, the new environment, the new community, all of those things are new and influential. And you decide that 75% of your worldview needs to be updated. Well, you don't have anything holding you to the ground. That everything else above is going to come crumbling down if you don't take that apart first. If we're still sticking with so you go through a radical transformation, and you hope, and that is what happens. You hope, if you're smart, you do more than hope, but you hope that the people who are around you trying to build into that, your professors, your teachers, if you're in a church community or small groups or whatever, you hope that the people who are seeing your life come crumbling down have good intention in helping you build back up, because that is a scary reality to take on. I'm not saying that you shouldn't, but you should do so cautiously and with open eyes, because many people end up going into a universe. The reason why so many people end up, buying into an ideology that's destructive in their first couple years of university, or even the first 3 months of university. Sometimes students will come back for Christmas holiday and their parents won't recognize who they are, and they won't recognize their parents. Everything's changed. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's okay. I don't want to denigrate that process too much, but maybe that's not the best thing as well. And so, you want to keep, you want to make sure that the things that you're getting rid of, as you start getting rid of them, you're sure that what is replacing it is going to be better for you and better for your family, better for your community, testable, like we talked about, coherent with reality. You don't want to just get rid of something because someone tells you that you're wrong, or your worldview is, this, that, or the other. You better make sure that the person or idea that's telling you that has something that's going to supplant it, that's also more based in reality.
Yeah. So, what would you say? Can you do to find a balance between the two?
At your age, or at what age? Like when you're older? At what part of the journey?
I think we're all at a different part. Even I don't think the age necessarily dictates where you are on your journey.
I think how many things you've rigidified in your life, like you said,
Sure.
does change.
Okay, so sure, why not? How about for me? 16 years.
So we can, in what framework do you want to pose this? Because it depends on, you brought up religious worldview. That's a pretty heady. Is there another way to think through that, or another topic to think through, or would you like me to respond to that, to a religious worldview? How do you rigidify, and how do you stay open? Because that's a difficult one.
It could be religious worldview, or it could also just be things that are just more practical, like habits or like ideas you formed. Ideas I think are the easiest to change. Like if your idea is proven wrong, then hopefully you'll realize.
How do you know if it's proven?
Exactly.
It's actually very difficult.
Well, to some extent, I would say. That's out of your. That's too difficult to. It's difficult to explain, but once you. It's about your mindset, I guess. Let's just not talk about like ideas. Let's just say habits or the way you do things. That could involve a religious like worldview, but how do you not end up being the person that goes against something that seems rational?
That's an even more difficult question. um, you know, because there are a lot of people who are doing and saying things that are, to a rational mind, completely irrational in the world right now. So it's a very relevant question. How do you know if you're the rational one or if you're the irrational one? Is that kind of how you're like?
I mean, that's a totally different topic, but I mean, why not? Sure.
I mean, I think it coheres with reality. If you're going to tell me, you know, that the table is brown, and to me it looks green, you know, well, one of us, it can't be both. I might be colorblind. I am colorblind. I'm red-green colorblind. So you would likely be the one telling me it's green.
Okay.
But I would have to find a way to have that tested. And there are ways of testing color. So, you know, if somebody tells you this is my worldview, this is why I think this way, and this is why you should think this way. You know, there are ways to test that, and maybe even observe it in their own life. That's why, like, the whole idea behind you know, observing the fruit in someone's life, and that being like, they will know you by what you produce. They will know me by how you operate in the world. Like what comes out of your life is an overflow of Christ in your life if you're a Christian. And I think that that's true. Like if you're a scientist, like I think that that's not just true for Christians. I think that if you're a scientist, what comes out of you is good science, is good hypotheses, is good theories, is a good lab. You know, if you're a great scientist, and you're well documented in your field, your peers respect you, and you're cited in many other papers. Well, so you can test whether or not someone's a reliable source by seeing the fruit that comes out of what they do. And I think that that's true with religious worldviews, which narrows things down quite quickly to a few operable worldviews. The reason why the religions that we have in the world, I think, as the dominant religions, being Islam, Christianity, Judaism, did I miss?
Buddhism?
Buddhism, sure.
Hinduism?
Yeah, Hinduism.
You missed the big one.
Taoism, you could say, is still kind of functional in parts of Asia. But the reason why those exist is because they do cohere with parts of reality. I mean, the precepts in Buddhism are rather true. Like, life is suffering. That's, you know, a fundamental precept of most major, if not all major religions. What you do with that, how you operate in the world out of that, I think. So you can test that. Is life suffering? Well, yeah, it is. And so if you're coming across someone's worldview that says that they know how to eliminate suffering, you know, that's a testable way, and there are worldviews that do that. There are, I would say, heretical worldviews that exist in all of those that try to eliminate those things and that problem. And so you can test, and then once you've tested that, you know, you can not have to test all of the other worldviews that are just like that one. And so you don't have to test all of the other ones that come along your way. You don't have to defend them necessarily when somebody else comes with, but you can know where you stand on that element of your faith. Is that? I kind of took
Not
it.
really,
Okay,
no.
go take it back to the original then.
So, how do we end up being the people who do things that are rational? Like, how do we continue to use our thought and our rationality to improve ourselves rather than get stuck in our ways or our habits or our ideas? And I guess, like, if an idea works better and fits better with reality from what you see, that's the idea you should use. And maybe that idea is proven wrong later on, but it's like, I think that's the best thing you can do, is to follow the thing that seems to fit the best. And I think sometimes people, they end up ignoring, like, once they find what suits them at one point in time, from then on they're like, okay, that's it. But even though, like, that idea or habit or whatever you want to call it, like, even though it doesn't suit them later on, they might still be using it. And they might have just decided, okay, this is something that's non-negotiable. So then they're actually, like, hurting themselves in the end of the day.
I think what it does boil down to is, on almost all of those things, faith that what it is that you're operating on, the idea, the precepts that you're operating on, are stable enough to operate. I mean, some of them you could update, and maybe it provides you, a little bit more grounding. Hopefully by the time you're 35, 40, those things are very, very few and far between. In your age, at your age, I would say, if you have the time to explore those things, then explore, test them. If it's a religious worldview that you come across that seems to hold something that's true or interesting, test it and find out if it is. I'm not saying change your religious worldview, but I'll say this for myself as someone who teaches history. Like, Christianity is the lens that I view everything through. So when I look at a religious worldview like Taoism, I'm not looking for how Christianity's better than Taoism. I'm looking for what's true here that I can find that coheres with how I view reality. Where does it not cohere? Is that something of interest? Is that something that I should pay attention to? Most of the truest things in life on a religious level are true across the plane. What differentiates Christianity from the other religions is Christ and the resurrection, the virgin birth. But the precepts, those things emerged from somewhere that we don't necessarily understand, because cultures that are in the East and the West have stumbled across many of those, and because they are the best way to live. They are the truest way to live. They're the most secure way to have faith. They're the best thing to have faith in as you move out into the world. And that's what, so finding those things, that's why I like studying other religions. It's cool to find those things that are common between all of those major worldviews, because it reaffirms what I already believe. Nothing's going, for me, the part of Christianity that's never going to change is Christ. Like I won't, at this point in my life, I'm not going to challenge that belief. So all of the other things are not, they're not a challenge to that, which means I can go and explore. That's why I said it's freeing. Like I can go and try and understand to the best of my ability with an open mind and an exploratory understanding any other religious worldview or philosophy, and I can only gain something out of it.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I still see it as I think there is a way to compromise both ways, and like both sides would be on one side you're completely stubborn and you have you have stability, but the stability isn't in something that is reflecting reality, and then on the other side you have no stability, but you're constantly trying to update it, but most of the time you're actually replacing the things that are true with things that aren't true because you're so eager to change them.
Yeah.
And I think some people are just eager to get rid of the old things, not because the old things don't work, but because they don't like the old things.
Yeah.
But I still think there is a way to get in the middle, and part of that would be accepting the things you believe, but not holding so tight to them that you're willing to sacrifice rationality for them.
100%.
Because, so how I see it is like, you build your way up, and you try to learn more and more, like understand the world, understand reality, try to understand as much as you can, and then, but as you start understanding, you have to use that understanding, otherwise it's pointless. You have to form a worldview. Otherwise it's pointless. If you're not doing anything within the information, then what does it matter? So I guess like building a structure that supports itself, but also being able to contrast that with reality constantly, so that you're able to update things and switch out certain things that you have misperceived.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense.
It's very difficult. I guess one way.
You don't have to do it with everything, like that.
No.
That's otherwise you fall apart.
Well.
And so, like, you have to pick the things. You have to be able to itemize as you go through your life. And I would say by the time you leave here, you should have a pretty solid understanding. I hope that you have a pretty solid understanding of a few things about yourself and who you want to become. A few things that you're aiming at, that you have faith are going to take you somewhere on an adventure that's worth living, because that's what you want in life. Like you want the adventure that you go on to yield something. Again, bringing it back to Christian worldview, there's a ministerial aspect of Christian living. There's an evangelical aspect of Christian living that is probably going to be part of that aim. But even if you're not a believer in Christ, like it's still true that you want something to aim at in life that's going to get you, that's going to take you on an adventure. I have a student who's studying cancer research stuff, and like the stuff that she posts on it's like, oh my goodness, like you're changing the world. I don't know if she believes in Christ or not, but like she's got a noble aim that's going to take her on an adventure for the rest of her life, and she's got the intellect to be able to go and pursue that. That seems like a pretty. She might get to a point, though, where it's not enough, and she wants to go forward. But for right now, everything else has to be sacrificed to that. And so, something else that could seem like it's worth more of her time, she's just going to disregard that, and for good reason.
Well, debatable.
For good reason in trying to achieve what her goals are from the outset, and what she's spent a tremendous amount of time in investing in herself and her education in order to pursue that aim.
Yeah.
If it was something lesser that came along, she would. But if she spent all of her time, it's kind of like I get this job here at Deloitte, and I'm looking out over the ocean every day from my classroom, but one of the things that eventually happens in any job is you start thinking, well, what else is out there? Is there something better? And if you're thinking that on your first week of your job, that's probably the wrong amount of time to find out if this is a good spot. It's easier for me here than it was in China, where it was, there were things that made that more difficult, that prospect more difficult. And some things that were in my control and some things that weren't in my control. But if that question was coming into my mind in the very first week or first 6 months, Mr. Steinkamp told us one of the things when we first got here, one of the things that he has a hard time with new staff that come in is the fact that you're deciding whether or not you want to stay with really only about a year and 3 months of time, because we re-sign our contracts. We're given our contract opportunities in October, which means that come the next 3 weeks, we're deciding if,
How long is the contract? The
2
next
years.
one? Okay.
So we're making a decision, and the first year is hard. Like anywhere you move, we have 2 kids. It's been tremendously difficult.
Yeah.
And so if I'm constantly trying to update, or something comes across my email saying, come work in this beautiful city in France. It's right on this amazing river. It's, a quiet town, and, that might, and it's, got all 4 seasons after experiencing, Malaysia for
1 season, actually 2 seasons.
Yeah.
Wet and wetter.
Wet and yeah.
But no,
wet and dry. There is a dry
season, but it's like
and
once
hot.
a week.
It's like hot
Once
and
a week
hotter.
rain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it might be appealing. And so, the reason why I say that it's inappropriate, likely at this point in her life, I think she's 26 years old, 25 years old. She's spent more time in university studying this stuff than she has practicing it in the real world. I would say that, if you go to university to study cancer research or something like that, at least devote the amount of time that you spent in university to pursuing that research in the real world. Give it at least that amount of yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, that was very interesting.
Yeah.
Good conversation.
Yeah. Hopefully, I don't know how long we went, but yeah. I'll send it to you, and you can watch it. And
I know you're gonna watch the whole thing.
I'll watch. Well, I don't know if I'll be able to watch the whole thing.
If you wanted to watch the whole thing, then You should have let me talk more.
Did you have anything else?
No. No, I don't. I don't think I have anything else. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's just funny because, yeah, life is just a bunch of waves going in many directions. But sometimes I would say for me, I'm more interested in certain things, and sometimes I'm just like the amount of questions I ask or that I'm wondering about goes up and down. So like right now it's pretty low. I don't have many questions to ask. The only questions are like very complicated ones, which is why I wanted to talk about this topic. Because yeah, I don't have many questions right now, but still got the questions. It's just fewer.
I mean, I still have I don't have, all I have is, my own experience in testing some of these ideas and then having had to update them myself.
What do you mean?
Well, like when you ask a question about what's, how do you make sure that you don't rigidify as you get older? I would say that's a really, really common question for a 16 or 17-year-old. Another version of that is, how do I limit myself to pursuing one thing when all of these things are interesting?
Yeah.
And I think you choose a thing. I think you sacrifice all of those things to pursue one thing, which is a sacrifice. You are killing something.
Sure.
But all of those, and most of the things that you're killing off are things that probably need to die.
And once again, you have to use some rationality. You have to see.
But some of it's faith.
Sure,
I think it's a mixture of rationality and faith.
Yeah.
Because you can't rationalize.
Faith that it will work out.
Yeah.
It will work out for the better.
Yeah. Well, I mean, imagine.
If you don't believe that, then it will work out for the worst.
Exactly.
If you don't believe that you can become something. If you don't believe that you can be who you want to be, or that you can be someone that has an impact, or whatever your goal is, if you don't believe you can achieve it, it's over.
Well, and the reason why it's over is because you won't make the necessary sacrifices out of faith to go and do that thing.
Exactly.
And so you'll never be willing to give up everything in pursuit of that, which is what it might take if it's something that's worth your life.
Yeah.
So those are hard questions. I still don't necessarily know that, for a variety of reasons, like if I want to be a teacher the rest of my life, I think I do.
You don't know.
But I don't know, I'm probably going to make the sacrifice of, like at this point, at this stage in my life, I'm probably going to. I've killed off a lot of other things that are interesting to me.
Yeah.
And so I've limited it down to a couple different things. I've tried sales. I hated sales. I was fairly decent at it, but at the end of the day, I didn't like all of the things that in order for me to be a good salesperson that I had to do and say.
Yeah.
And, some of it was, it allowed for creativity, and some of it was just repetition. And
saying something, even emphasis when you don't have it.
Yeah. Excitement when you don't have it.
But even teaching does that. I know some teachers, like I was talking to Mr. Anderson, he said that the hardest part about teaching is the energy it requires. You have to. Oh,
for sure.
You have to be able to make something interesting, or say it in a way that is appealing, because that's literally your whole job. And whether you feel it or not, you have to do it.
I think teaching is also making sure that you're, like, it did change in a way that made it a little bit more interesting for me, going from like what it was like for me in the 90s, going to elementary school and or in middle school, where the teacher holds all of the knowledge. It was even like that kind of for me going into college. The teacher holds all the knowledge, and he's going to be in the front of the classroom giving you all of that knowledge. Well, now in the middle of media literacy class, I can say a statistic and someone can get on Google and fact check me to find out if what I just said was true or false.
Yeah.
And so in many ways, what a good teacher is now it's still the same thing as what a good teacher was back then. It just alleviates the teacher being the bearer of all of the information to the teacher being the facilitator of how do you make sense of the world through the subject that you're learning right now. Like history is full of it's a much more direct line in my mind than something like language learning or something like that. But I mean, if you're passionate about mathematics, a great way to help students become also passionate about mathematics is to explain aspects of the world using mathematics. Like, here's this crazy thing happening over here. This is what we can use math to be able to understand this.
Yeah.
I mean, you can take people who numbers are completely uninteresting to and get them passionate about a subject.
No, you can't.
You can.
I mean, sure you can, but some people just don't like math. No matter, well, they have to be interested. There has to be some sort of level of interest to start off with.
Sure.
You can't start with nothing and then get something.
Sure.
But yeah, usually people's interest level isn't zero. So
I would say very seldom are people that nihilistic in a classroom like we would have here. Now, that's not necessarily true everywhere, but I don't have to beg students to pay attention to what I'm talking about, even if it's something that's not going to be on a test.
yeah,
It's in many cases the meaning is evident and obvious. Luckily for the classes that I teach, that's the case.
yeah.
But we can end it there if you want.
Sure.
All right. All right. Signing off.
3, 2, 1.